Welcome to Frickety Frack. We do talk back. Thank you for joining us in this episode.
Hello, my name is Jeff, and I'm Frick.
Hello, my name is Patrick, and I'm Frack. Frickety Frack, We Do Talk Back is a show where we will discuss different aspects of fandom and how they relate to the gospel. We're going through the Prime Video series Invincible and connecting lessons from each episode to teachings in the Bible. Just as many of you are, we're also fans of other things as well. So when we finish Invincible, we will go in a different direction and look at anything ranging from anime, comics, video games, movies, or other things that we're fans of. We got the name of the show from our father who dubbed us Frick and Frack since we were kids.
We are currently on episode 7 of the first season of Invincible. This episode is entitled, We Need to Talk. The scene opens with Debbie Grayson waking up alone and going downstairs to find Nolan with his bloody uniform. Mark, William, and Amber are traveling home from the college road trip, and it's awkward. Eve wakes up happy with her new world or a new outlook on life and the fact that she is no longer considering herself a superhero. Debbie asks Nolan why he kept the uniform. He says he used it against Damien Darkblood, or maybe he wanted to get caught. Debbie asks why he did it. Was he blackmailed, mind controlled? The very common comic book tropes as to why a superhero would do something as heinous as that. Nolan says it wasn't any of those things. He wants to explain, but asks her to trust him, and they'll be okay. Debbie says she can't trust him anymore. Nolan leaves, and Debbie attempts to reach out to Mark, but Donald tells Debbie she needs to leave now. In an attempt to patch things up with Amber, Mark reveals that he's invincible. She admits she figured it out weeks ago. Mark is confused why they're fighting then, if she knows why he's always been late and undependable. She states she's mad that she made her feel like a fool and for not trusting her. She tells Mark to leave, and he obliges. Monster Girl returns home from the hospital, and Robot appears to be acting weird. Robot arrives before the Mauler twins with a deformed body and a stasis tube, and it turns out that Robot is actually human, and the Mauler twins realize that they were building a new body for Robot. William and Mark have a hash out session in William's car. However, Mark does not find the advice helpful and leaves to talk to someone else. Cecil and Debbie reveal to each other that they know Nolan killed the Guardians. We see Nolan standing in the mountains, practicing his speech to talk to Mark and to explain what's going on. The Mauler twins make a copy of Robot's brain in the body they cloned for him. The Robot wakes up in the new body, and in this new body pulls a mercy kill on his old body. Robot reveals that now that their deal is complete, it is time for the Mauler twins to return to prison. Nolan returns home to try and talk to Mark. There he gets ambushed by Cecil's men. Nolan quickly disposes of them, but discovers that Donald has been spying on his family. Nolan kills Donald and leaves again to search for Mark. We do find out that Mark has found Eve out in the wilderness. While Robot is fighting the Mauler twins, Cecil summons Robot back to the Guardians HQ. Omni-Man intimidates William into telling him where Mark is, and Robot also reveals his new body to the Guardians. Everyone is skeptical, and Rexplode is quite upset and wants to know why he looks like him, but younger him. Cecil drops the hammer on Omni-Man. It's a powerful blast from a satellite. Although the first blast does cause Omni-Man to have a nosebleed, Omni-Man destroys the satellite. Robot reveals that he chose Rexplode's body because Monster Girl showed interest in Rexplode. The Mauler twins reveal that they have aspirations to control the immortal, and that is what the deal with Robot involved, with getting a controller collar in place to try and control the immortal. Cecil continues to attempt to delay Omni-Man from getting to Invincible by using every trick in his playbook. Those tricks include former U.S. soldiers turned into Reanimen and releasing the juiced up monster from earlier in the series that did, in fact, give Omni-Man some problems. The Guardians see the video of what is happening to Omni-Man and wonder if they should go help him, but Cecil overrides them by saying if this goes bad, they are his last hope against Omni-Man. Rex realizes and then points out that the likely cause of what happened to the Guardians was indeed Omni-Man. Invincible shows up to rescue his dad from the monster. And as the monster gains the upper hand, Debbie asks Cecil to call off the monster. He refuses since he can't for certain know where Mark's allegiance lie, and refuses to stop something that may actually stop both Mark and Nolan. Debbie reveals this is why she has always hated Cecil. Cecil admits he hates himself too. The Immortal wakes up in a blood rage and wants to know where Omni-Man is. The Immortal arrives to fight Omni-Man while Invincible struggles with the monster. Omni-Man kills the Immortal again, with the world watching and his son watching.
So, as we like to do, we like to look at some of the things that are different in the show than they were in the comics. The first one is when Donald dies facing Omni-Man. We see that he is in fact a human, and as far as I can recollect about the comics, Donald was always either a robot / cyborg from the beginning, and actually a really cool one. I always loved his schlub. I mean, I hate to use that word, but I mean that's just what he always looks like. He looks like a schlub. And then he'll always transform into in the comics, he'll transform into this awesome like robot with giant cannons and stuff. Great stuff. And then the other one is Cecil in the comics didn't mind working with Sinclair. He was, he had no bones about it. But in this, he says like, ugh, I hate even talking to you. And so we see how Cecil is still practical and wanting to defend the globe and the United States as best he can. And he'll make a deal with any devil that he can, but it doesn't mean he likes it. Where the Cecil from the comics didn't mind it as much.
Right. So fingers crossed Donald comes back and they do the comic book version of him and turn him into a robot.
Yeah, I would
that's
love
kind of that's kind of what I like about what I hope that they do for the future. Because I do enjoy Donald. He's a nice side character. So
definitely very underrated.
Yeah, he is a very underrated character in the Invincible universe. So one of my favorite scenes in the entire episode is when Mark and William are, kind of, airing their grievances as to what's transpired over this past weekend, and the fact that, William's upset that like the hottest guy he's ever dated is now seriously deformed and reanimate. And Mark is lamenting the fact that he feels like the world's worst superhero. He's the world's worst friend and the world's worst boyfriend. And so William gives him some hard advice. He's like trying to get him to take a chill pill and gain some perspective on his life. Because again, at this point where they're having this conversation, William has not had his encounter with Omni-Man that's terrifying, and Invincible also does not know what's going on. William brings up to Invincible, to Mark, he's like, hey, you've got parents that love you. You're of superpowers. I mean, really just study, get your grades up, and figure it out. You've got time and you've got a lot going for you. And basically saying, if you had, you've got it pretty good. And so Mark doesn't respond well, and it's kind of like, William looks at him kind of sideways, like, why is he being so indignant? It's like, what? Friends tell friends the truth. And Mark's response was, well, not like that, they don't. And then runs off because, unfortunately, what some people don't realize is that sometimes if you're going to be a good friend, you need to be a straight shooter like that. You can't sugarcoat, because especially if you've been trying to kind of sugarcoat it in hopes that I don't, me personally, I don't feel like going with that advice from the get go when dealing with a friend is a good idea. However, at some point you have to, especially if they continue to make the same mistakes over and over again. It's like, all right, look, I've tried being nice and trying telling you in a positive manner about how you can kind of fix your problem or situation, but you continue to make the same mistakes over again and showing you're not listening to me. So now let me tell you some hard truth.
Yeah.
So William is actually, in fact, being a good friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just interesting how this is a different Mark in the series than he is in the comics. Like in the TV series, he's much more self-doubt. He's not as confident. He's not as sure of himself as he gets into superheroing. And so that's an interesting little kind of change. And
he's also a lot more emotional.
Yeah. But
or I feel like he is.
Yeah, I would agree to that. And so that's that's one of those things that you know Robert Kirkman has grown as a writer since he first started Invincible, and he's got uh, a team of writers for this TV series. So he it's going to be a little bit different, but that's one of those things that I like seeing the differences and everything. And so I tell you, Rexplode was on point this episode. This is honestly probably up there for Rexplode awesomeness.
Yeah. And the fact that he's the one that actually points out that Omni-Man is the one that killed the Guardians. Nobody else said it. Like, I'm sure the other Guardians were kind of putting it together and kind of figuring it out, but he's the one that just states it outright. He's probably the one that killed the Guardians.
Yeah, they were the last hope against Omni-Man.
Yeah, he's like, that's probably what happened to the last hope is.
Gosh, and then the beer and the milk cartons. That was awesome. His reaction to seeing Robot and his body.
Well, hold on. Let's explain a little bit about the milk cartons and the beer. So, earlier in the series when they had first kind of start, like they had replaced the Guardians of the Globe. They had celebrated one time with beer, actual beer bottles. And Black Samson did not take to it kindly. He thought it was disrespectful. It's like, dude, we barely won. We were garbage in this fight, and you're celebrating that. And Rexplode's like, dude, we won. Who cares? Let's drink beer, drink many beers. So what he winds up doing in order to get around Black Samson and his cranky pants about whether or not that they shouldn't drink beer is that he brings up one of their hidden refrigerators that is full of milk cartons. So it looks like there's a bunch of milk there. In fact, Rexplode has emptied all of those and filled them with beer instead. And it turns out it's like he didn't even drink the milk. He just poured it out, just wasting all of that milk. So that's the explanation with that. And it was actually clever and something very Rexplode.
Oh yeah. And then his reaction to his clone, then robots upgrading or sinking or whatever. He was like, I love one of his lines is like, man, we need one of those circle symbol, so we know that he's at least still alive. And
spinning wheel.
Spinning wheel. There we go. My family, we call it the waiting wheel when those circles come up, and we have a little song about it. Waiting for the waiting wheel, waiting for the waiting wheel. As you might be able to tell, I have 4 children under the age of 8, so we have lots of little ditties like that. Trademark pending.
So I have made it well known that I love any and all times that the Mauler twins show up. And so we get a little bit of a highlight with the Mauler twins in this episode, and the fact that I feel like in this episode we actually get to really see the Mauler's twins' genius in this episode, and the fact that they're able to imprint Robot's brain into their cloned body. And they quickly one of the things that they didn't, I don't think they really, if I recall correctly, I don't remember them really have it, like they didn't up the dramatic effect in the comic with them transferring the intelligences. But I do like that they showed that. It's just like, well, they figured out very quickly. It was like, oh, we didn't take into account that his brain is probably deformed like his body too. And so they very quickly on the fly fix it up, so then that way the brain could properly copy into the new body. And so one of the things that I do like is that they kept the comic accurate in the fact that when he awakes in the twin body, he does in fact kill his old, like he kills his old self, because it's, it was always the plan. Once he figured out a way to get a healthy body, he didn't want to live like that anymore. Which I can understand and sympathize with a little bit. Obviously, we live in a different world where we don't have that kind of technology,
right?
Or at this time, anyways. We may in the future, who knows? But I definitely understand and sympathize with Robot's position. It's just like, I've got a perfectly healthy body. Why on earth would I keep this one around? And I do like the added element of this, kind of like, look, I can rebuild the stasis tube. I can put you back in there. And his old self is like, no, this was always the plan. So it was just, but besides that, they actually put up a pretty decent fight against Robot. And they very quickly on the fly put together this pretty powerful gun, and they get a good shot at Robot in his new body. However, one of the drones steps in the way and prevents him from getting killed. So it's actually, again, and unfortunately the technology wasn't good enough to do a second shot, but it was good enough. So again, I always love the Mauler twins, and they would have been captured if Robot hadn't gotten called back to Guardians HQ. But we do discover what the Mauler twins' plan was this entire time, and it's that they wanted to take control of the Immortal. And which leads to like my second favorite part of the series, of this particular episode. And the history of the Immortal comes much later in the comics, but I love that they took the opportunity to kind of show a little bit of his history, because it heavily implies, well, first of all, it shows him kind of like doing the Vandal Savage thing of being this like caveman that finds this mystical element and becoming immortal, or that's where he gets his power. But then we see him as heavily implying that he is in fact King Arthur. And then we find out that they heavily imply that he is in fact Abraham Lincoln, and which is again all stuff that happened in the comics that they made as a part of the Immortals background. And so I genuinely love that. Like, I love that they included that. It's actually one of my favorite things that was hoping that they would include if they ever got around to the background of the Immortal. Because again, it's something that's really cool from the comics that they would go about And then it really sucks to be the immortal because he died again in this episode.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Maulers, the Mauler twins, as Jeff was saying, they're great in this episode. Uh, one of they have a very funny line in this where they say, they're like, "What do you want to do now? Besides break his stupid face, even though we just finished making it." I love that line. That was a great line because they recognize their good work. They're like, "Oh, that's pretty good work," and then they're like, "But I still want to break his face."
So one of the big themes throughout the entire episode is the relationship struggles pretty much across the board in this episode, and the fact that Nolan is having relationship issues with everybody. Let's call it like it is. He's having relationships with everybody at this moment, except for maybe Mark, because Mark doesn't know the whole truth. And he'll find out the whole truth in the next episode, but he's starting to get he's starting to kind of see something. And then Mark is having relationship trust issues with Eve, and to a degree, William. William, not as much. But there is some, kind of frustration on William's part. And Cecil is having trust issue. Cecil first of all doesn't trust anybody, except Donald. And Debbie's does not trust Cecil. So to me it's kind of funny, in Debbie's world right now, it basically boils down to Cecil is the lesser of two evils at the moment. Mm-hmm. She doesn't know 100% of what's going on with Nolan, but she trusts Cecil more than him right now. And then Robot, his trust is at an all-time low with the Guardians. So it's just it's this recurring issue in this episode, is that there's some serious trust issues. So like the title for this episode was "We Need to Talk." That's a very serious, that's a very appropriate title for this episode, because that's basically what everybody's needing to do at this time. We need to talk. We need to talk about this, about what's going on with our relationship, and see how we're going to make this work. But I'll tell you, Cecil did have some great lines in this episode that I really liked. Especially, my personal favorite is the $400 billion for that satellite for the world's most expensive nosebleed.
Yeah, that's a great line.
And by the way, the animation for that blast, absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely loved it. To me, it was like something out of an anime. And just absolutely phenomenal stuff. Absolutely phenomenal. And it's just like, the first one only worked is because he didn't react to it in time. I do like that Omni-Man was still like, oh, he wouldn't, and then gets smashed to the ground, and then gets right back up, and goes directly at the satellite again. And he's, and they're like, and Cecil's like, hit him again. And so instead of diverting course, I don't understand. I've never understood this in things that, when they're getting shot at by something that's shooting linearly, just in one direct line, why don't they just sidestep? And it's like, okay, now I'm out of the path of the way of the laser beam. But I can understand why Omni-Man doesn't, is that he realizes, first of all, this is a tickle, now that I'm actually braced for it, and just flies through and absolutely destroys that satellite. But I do love the commentary. It's like $400 billion, world for the world's most expensive nosebleed. Absolutely love that.
Yeah, and he has a great line too after Donald blows up the safe house. He's like, "Yeah, we evacuated the neighborhood, but even then we had to lower the yield than we wanted to. It's like, but it should knock him, it should knock him out for an hour or two, or not phase him at all." And I was like, "You really expected that tiny of an explosion to knock him out?"
So that's just one of the things that's really cool. They're, as Omni-Man is starting to lose it and needing to finally explain and justify his actions, we're starting to see more and more of Omni-Man's true power. The first time we ever really got to see him cut loose, which was an awesome, awesome scene, was when he took out the Flaxens. And so we're starting to see that more and more, and that Omni-Man is just really on a whole nother level compared to everybody else. And I do like that. Again, like Patrick was saying earlier, Cecil is very practical. He doesn't necessarily always like the decisions he has to make, but again, for the sake of practicality, he's like, I'm not going to call. It's like, I don't know where Mark's allegiance lies, so I'm not going to call off the monster that might be able to take care of them both. And so it's like he's very practical. It's like, you know what, in the long term, for the greater good, it might be best if, as much as it sucks to do this, we might be better off of killing Mark too. So I do like that practicality that Cecil takes. And obviously Cecil is very much inspired by Nick Fury from Shield. So it's just something that is really great for them to continue that. And I do like this. I do very much enjoy the adaptation of Cecil in this series.
This episode's biblical theme is Matthew chapter 14, verse 31. It says, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt?
Okay. All right. So a little explanation about what's going on in this Bible verse. This is actually one of my favorite, if not my favorite chapter in the entire Bible. So what's happening during this time is that Jesus, or the disciples, had gone ahead of Jesus. They were traveling by boat, and a storm started to pick up, and so the disciples were getting worried and were getting nervous. And then they look out and they see what they think is a ghost, because obviously no one can actually walk on water. And they get frightened, but then Jesus says, tells them, it's me. There's no reason to be afraid. And Peter, being the bold person that he is, says, like, well, Jesus, if that's really you, tell me to come out and meet you. And Jesus says, come. So Peter gets out of the boat, starts walking, and the storm and the wind start to pick up, and he gets frightened and sinks. Jesus reaches out his hand and says, you have little faith, why did you doubt? So like we were saying earlier, the heavy theme of this episode was the lack of trust between the relationships, between the key relationships in this series. Debbie does not trust Nolan. Amber does not trust Mark. And nobody trusts Cecil, and Cecil trusts nobody. The one person he did trust is dead. So one of the things that is very hard, and something that I try to be in a place where I trust people. I don't want to live in a world where I automatically assume ill will from people towards me. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I like to trust people. I like to believe when somebody tells me something, they're telling me the truth. Unfortunately, I have learned the hard way on more than one occasion that that's not always the case with people. And it's always funny when I talk with people and I tell people that that's not my standard way of operating. Then they're like, well, and they look at me and they kind of laugh. It's like, well, that's because you're a good person and you don't have ill will towards people. So you don't expect people to treat you that way either. And so it is definitely something that I strive to do. I don't always succeed. I do fail. I try. And then on top of it too, I try to be trustworthy too. Am I always trustworthy? No, I'm not. I do strive to be. I definitely strive to be trustworthy, somebody you can rely on, somebody you can look to as an example. Uh, However, I do fail. So ultimately, what it boils down to is do the best you can to build strong, trustworthy relationships with people in your life, in your circle of influence. However, you also have to understand that we as humans, we're going to fail one another. The only person, the only person that has ever walked the face of this planet that 100% has earned your trust and deserves your trust wholeheartedly is Jesus Christ. And so that's one of the things that's so important about learning from this particular Bible verse and this particular story from the Bible, is that when the world is going crazy around you, there's a storm going on in your life, there's one person you can truly rely on, and that's Jesus. There's no reason to doubt. There's no reason to lack trust, to lack faith in him. He's going to be there for you. He's always there for you. And so, yes, there are going to be times when people let you down. There are going to be times when you let people down. But not once will Jesus ever let you down.
So with this verse, I love Peter. Peter is one of my favorite people in the entire Bible, and because he is gung ho, the man wants to be the best disciple that he can be, and I emphasize he can be because he thinks he knows what it means to be a good disciple instead of being the disciple Jesus wants him to be. And so, when he steps out of the boat, that's an act of faith that he had. And the reason why he fell was because he took his eyes off Jesus and looked at the waves. And because of the storm, the waves, he's like, even though he stepped out and was walking on water too, he faltered and then he sank. And in our own lives, we're going to have those moments. And we will have to step out of the boat, take a leap of faith, and be like, okay, how am I serving Jesus to the best of my ability? And am I getting out of the boat, or am I staying safe? And for the only way for the kingdom to grow is to, in fact, get out of the boat and go into uncharted waters, unexplored areas. And so it's really important for each one of us to be able to do that. And so I would encourage you that if you're enjoying the podcast, enjoying the show, enjoying talking to us about the Bible, also figure out where you belong in ministry. Doesn't necessarily mean you be a pastor or something like that, but you have a place and you might be called to step out of the boat. And so be like Peter at first and get out, step out of the boat, step out on the water. But then don't be like Peter and lose your sight of Jesus instead of the world around you. And so that's really important. And so I want to challenge you for that, to go out, step out of the boat. So, Jeff,
just to add on to that real quick, I'm glad you brought this up, because that's actually one of the things that I generally bring up a lot of times with this story, is that Peter gets a lot of grief for his lack of faith. In this encounter, the fact that he does sink, but you brought up a great point. Peter actually does walk on water. When you read the scripture, it makes it clear that he is taking steps out of the boat and begins to walk before he sinks, which is more than any of the other disciples do. All the other disciples are still in the boat and they watch. And then on top of it too, they don't even do anything to try and help Peter. They just sit there and watch him drown.
Yeah. And a lot of the shows and stuff are centered around the Bible. I don't know if this has happened in The Chosen or anything like that. But there's a cartoon series that my kids really love that's called Superbook. And they actually mention this. And Peter gives that rebuttal because, like, all the disciples are talking about, like, well, I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be the best. And Peter is like, I walked on water. It was like, and you sank. He's like, well, at least I got out of the boat.
Mhm.
um, so, all right, Jeff, how would you rate this episode?
Um, Honestly, I give this episode a 5. The action is top notch in this scene. Omni Man go on a little bit of a warpath is absolutely phenomenal. Seeing more of his dark side is great. Um, I like that aspect of him. He was actually very. I was honestly genuinely concerned for William's safety
Me too.
when Omni Man came to confront him, and uh, and then just them trying to hash out the relationship stuff. Um, the story getting this is the penultimate episode. So there's one more episode this season, and it's really set up a great thing. And I love they picked such a great way to end this episode and pulling straight from the comics in that what when Mark you know when everything kind of goes wrong is when and the Immortal is killed by Omni Man again, but this time Invincible is around, and he sees his dad kill the Immortal. So it was definitely it's definitely very different when you see your dad uh, kill one of the world's most famous superheroes in the Immortal, and when you see him kill like Flaxen soldiers. So it's very different because he does not see the Immortal as an enemy. He's a somebody to aspire to. He's a hero.
Mhm.
Flaxens were the enemy, so he kind of understands Omni Man killing those people, but killing the Immortal, that just doesn't make sense. Um, and I just love, like, because at the end of the issue where that happens, Omni Man is covered in blood and says to Mark, we need to talk, which is exactly how this episode ended. Um, so it's uh, just very appropriate that's how they ended this episode, and it's just top notch all around, and just absolutely great. And um, one of the things that I actually kind of liked in this is that Eve actually they don't give the full conversation that Eve has with Cecil, but she listens to him. He says enough that it's like, okay, he's talking to me like this. He doesn't ever talk to me like this.
Yeah.
I need to listen. And so, because it'd be very easy for her to still stay in the fight, and it's kind of like, no, girl, you're heavily outclassed.
That, and he didn't want her to help anyways, so that way, um uh if he wanted the best shot at being able to take out Omni-Man and Invincible at the same time. Like if she got in the way, then that lowers the possibility of that happening.
Right. Especially considering how powerful she is.
Yeah. Um, well, I'm gonna have to do the same thing. I'm gonna have to rate it a 5 as well. I mean, it's great. It's a great episode. Um, the action sequences are good. Anytime the Maulers show up, it's good. Um, Blood Fury Immortal, awesome sauce. Uh, it's just a great episode. I mean, uh, and there's really no way to improve the episode. I mean, so it's just downright perfect. So, all right. So,
Yep.
anyone with questions for us about the biblical lessons that we talked about in this episode or other discussion ranging from anime, comics, or anything in general, feel free to email us at frickityfractalkback@gmail.com or reach out to us on Twitter at frickityf or at frickityfrac on Instagram and Facebook. Know that we love you, that God loves you. So let's put some pants on and let's get into the sky.